Okay, we back live. Back live. Had to move around some. About to get everything plugged back up. Make sure y'all share this post. Yeah, we just had to move around a few things. Yeah. Get ready to finish up the color of law. Just trying to get the cord situated here. Okay. Plugged in. Again, we just had to move sets. Getting ready to finish up reading The Color of Law. Share this post for us. Share this post. I'm gonna pin it to the top of the page. We had to switch sets up. It's still doing a little drizzling out here. Had to find a new spot to set up. Okay. 1 second now. Headphones plugged up. Okay. Oh no, battery dead. Okay. 1 second, y'all. Okay. Again, we on day 8. The ongoing teaching. Having to move locations. So share this post. We finna get ready to finish reading The Color of Law, which is right here. The Color of Law. This is what we read, and we're getting ready to finish it up. Okay. Put that there. Okay. Trying to get some things situated. My fault. I should have waited to start this live, but I don't want to end it now, though. Alright, give me 1 second. I'm going to plug something up. I'll be right back. We're going to start reading. Share this post. Share this post. Alright, my fault. I had to go get some stuff plugged in. Batteries is getting low. Dang, this battery getting low too. It's fine, we'll figure it out. Alright. Oh, damn. It's so chilly out, man. So chilly out. Okay. Finna finish up the color of law. Man, give me a second here. Get right. Damn. Camera. Turn the camera this way, son. Alright. What up, what up, what up, what up? What up? Finishing up this book. Okay. Hello? Hello? I probably ain't been able to hear nothing I said. It's in there. Mike. Mike, Mike, Mike. Mike, 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 Mike. I can hear the little buzz in the back. Look. I'm gonna switch the batteries. Damn, I do so much stuff. Okay, hold on 1 second, y'all. All right. Alright. Oh, shit. Shit. Fuck. Okay. Oh, my goodness. Whoa, that's better. Oh, my goodness. Hope that wasn't too loud. It is cold. It is, well, it ain't cold. Let me rephrase that. It's not cold compared to what we have dealt with. But the last of my blankets and sleeping bag was stolen, as some people may know, by the Rockford Police Department about 2 days ago. So, and it is still drizzling out here. I want people to understand the conditions we working in. It is still drizzling out here. We are underneath an overhang out here by City Hall. Man, my legs is cold. I don't think I got enough layers on. I ain't got enough layers. Okay. Ooh. Okay, y'all. That's this, right? Okay. How that sound? How's that sounding? That sounding good? That sound alright? Think it should be good. I got these headphones over my hood, so I don't know how good I'm sounding. Oh shit. Okay. Let's get this started. We had a few. Okay, let's turn this up. Oh, let's turn it down. Turn that up some. Oh, there we go. There we go a little bit. Okay. There we go. I can hear myself. Oh shit. Okay. I just need to hear myself some. Okay, so had to do a little bit of moving. It's still slightly drizzling, sprinkling down here. That's limiting where we can post up at. So I'm about to finish reading The Color of Law. Sorry, y'all. I'm just trying to get my body covered by this blanket. It's a little chilly because I don't have my proper blankets. It's a little chilly. Okay. The Color of Law. Let's finish this one out. Let's rock it out. Let's rock this out. Looking forward and looking back. All right, page 188. Part 5. Because Americans vary greatly in their economic and social circumstances, any government program will affect different Americans differently, even if, on its face, the program treats all alike. A sales tax, for example, applies equally to all, but will be more of a burden to lower-income consumers than to higher-income ones. The legal jargon for this is that it has a disparate impact on different groups. In a society where everyone's situation is different, disparate impacts are unavoidable, but we can try to minimize them. In the case of a sales tax, by exempting grocery purchases. Once the juror segregation was established, African Americans and whites were not affected similarly by subsequent race-neutral policies. The Fair Housing Act prohibits housing programs whose disparate impact on African Americans reinforces their segregation, unless the programs have a legitimate purpose that cannot be accomplished otherwise. But the Fair Housing Act does not prevent disparate impacts from other non-housing programs that build on pre-existing residential patterns. Unlike the activities that compromise the juror segregation, these programs need not have the intent of harming African Americans, although sometimes they may, but they do harm nonetheless. Several seemingly race-neutral programs have reinforced the disadvantages of African Americans that were initially created by race-conscious housing policy. Along with the mortgage interest deduction, another policy that on its face is race-neutral but has a discriminatory effect is our national transportation system. We have invested heavily in highways to connect commuters to their downtown offices, but comparatively little in buses, subways, and light rail to put suburban jobs within reach of urban African Americans and to reduce their isolation from the broader community. Although in many cases urban spurs of the interstate highway systems were unconstitutionally routed to clear African Americans away from white neighborhoods and businesses, that was not the system's primary purpose, and the decision to invest limited transportation funds in highways rather than subways and buses has had a disparate impact on African Americans. Transportation policies that affected the African American population in Baltimore illustrates those followed throughout the country. Over 4 decades, successive proposals for rail lines or even a highway to connect African American neighborhoods to better opportunities have been scuttled because finances were short and building expressways to serve suburban entities was a higher priority. Try that one more time. Sorry about that, y'all. African American neighborhoods to better. Over 4 decades, Successive proposals for rail lines or even a highway to connect African American neighborhoods to better opportunities have been scuttled because finances were short and building expressways to serve suburban entities was a higher priority. Isolating African Americans was not the stated purpose of Maryland's transportation decisions, though they also may have been some racial motivation. In 1975, when Maryland proposed a rail line to connect suburban and In 1975, when Maryland proposed a rail line to connect suburban Anne Arundel County and downtown Baltimore, white suburbanites pressed their local political leaders to oppose the plan, which they did. A review by Johns Hopkins University researchers concluded that the residents believed that the rail line would enable poor, inner-city blacks to travel to the suburbs, steal residents' TVs, and then return to their ghettos. Maryland's State Transportation Secretary stated that his office would not force a transit line on an area that clearly does not want it, failing to explain how he balanced the desires of a white suburban area that clearly does not want it with the desires of urban African Americans who needed it. 40 years later, little had changed. In 2015, Maryland's governor... 40 years later, little had changed. In 2015, Maryland's governor canceled a proposed rail link to Baltimore's West Side black neighborhood, saying the funds were needed for highway improvements. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund then filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Transportation, claiming that Maryland's priority for highways over mass transit had a disparate impact on African Americans. The case was still pending when the Obama administration left office. And so we return again here where we continue to see how these issues, though they may seem far away and seem far removed, are still very pertinent. Excuse me. To things going on every day. They're still having these things are still happening and still occurring every day on a daily basis. And so, to me, that was one of the more important portions of the book right there. Excuse me. One of the more important concepts of the book is highlighted right there, in that this is not something that was done in the 1920s, 1930s, and never happened again. You know, this is something that still has very real applications to today. These are something that is still being done today. These issues have not been resolved. And that is one of the things that I think this week we should be trying to be remembering and be reminded of throughout this week, is that a lot of the issues that are being brought up this week are issues that have not been solved. Okay. Oh, dang, got the page wet. Part 6. Yeah, it's crazy. Part 6. Actions of government and housing cannot... Part 6. Actions of government and housing cannot be neutral about segregation. They will either exasperate it or reverse it. Without taking care to do otherwise, exasperation is more likely. The federal government now operates 2 large programs to address the housing crisis faced by the poor and near poor, most of whom in many metropolitan areas are African American. Without an what's that? Chicken? Oh, no, he ain't never dropped nothing off. Sorry about that. Without an intent to do so, each program has been implemented in a manner that deepens racial segregation. 1, the low-income housing tax credit subsidizes developers whose multi-unit projects are available to low-income families. The other, housing choice vouchers, popularly known as Section 8, subsidizes families' rental payments so they can lease housing that they would not otherwise be able to afford. In the tax credit program, communities can veto developers' proposals, something that In the tax credit program, communities can veto developers' proposals, something that officials in middle-class areas don't hesitate to do. Many policymakers urge developers to build in already segregated neighborhoods in the hopes, usually a vain one, that their projects will revitalize deteriorating areas. Developers themselves also prefer to use tax credits in low-income neighborhoods because land is cheaper. It is easier to market new apartments to renters in the immediate vicinity, and there is less political opposition to additional housing for minorities and lower-income families. These conditions ensure that the tax credit projects will have a disparate impact on African Americans, reinforcing neighborhood segregation. An analysis of all tax credit unions nationwide, completed through 2005, found that about 3/4 were placed in neighborhoods where poverty rates were at least 20%. In the Section 8 program, landlords in most states and cities can legally refuse to rent to tenants who use housing vouchers, although a few jurisdictions prohibit such discrimination. The voucher amount is usually too small to allow for rentals in middle-class areas. A family that receives a voucher may find that the only way to take advantage of it is to move to a neighborhood even more segregated than the one where they were already living. As a result, few families with children who use Section 8 vouchers rented apartments in low-poverty neighborhoods in 2010, while over half rented in neighborhoods where the poverty rate was 20% or more, including some who rented where poverty rate was extreme, 40% or more. Where vouchers are used to rent suburban apartments, these apartments are frequently in segregated enclaves within otherwise middle-class suburbs. In 2008, the Inclusive Communities Project, ICP, a Dallas civil rights group, sued the state of Texas, claiming that the operation of the tax credit program had a disparate impact on African Americans, violating the Fair Housing Act. In the city of Dallas, 85% of all tax credit units for families were in census tracts where at least 70% of residents were minority. The ICP had been attempting to promote racial integration in the Dallas area by helping African American families with Section 8 vouchers find affordable apartments in predominantly white neighborhoods, but it was impeded because so many of the tax-subsidized family housing developments approved by the state of Texas were in heavily minority and low-income areas. In June 2015, the Supreme Court ruled in the ICP case that the disproportionate placement of subsidized housing in neighborhoods that have been segregated by past government policy could violate the Fair Housing Act, even if the placement was not intended to intensify segregation. But the opinion, written by Justice Anthony Kennedy, also allowed that placing subsidized units to support the revitalization of deteriorating neighborhoods could also be legitimate. So it is not evident how much of a nationwide push toward desegregation will result from the ICP case. Gentrification of private housing in urban areas, redevelopment projects, and highway routing have forced low-income and minority families to search for new accommodations in a few inner-ring suburbs that are in transition from white to white to what? Oh, my fault. I messed that sentence up. From white majority. From white to... Oh, okay. Sorry. Gentrification of private housing in urban areas, redevelopment projects, and highway routing have forced low-income and minority families to search for new accommodations in a few inner-ring suburbs that are in transition from white to majority minority. When the tax credit and Section 8 programs subsidize the movement of low-income families into such suburbs and not into predominantly middle-class ones, they contribute to segregation. Ferguson, Missouri, outside of St. Louis, is such a place. When the Section 8 and tax credit program failed to offer opportunities to settle throughout the St. Louis metropolitan area, they contribute to Ferguson's transformation from an integrated to a predominantly minority and increasingly low-income community. As public housing towers like Pruitt Ego in St. Louis were taken down in the early 1970s and their sites redeveloped, residents were forced into other segregated neighborhoods. So this is a picture of a project building being torn down. You're not gonna be able to. I don't know how well you'll be able to see it. Okay. Civil rights advocates and local housing officials face a difficult conundrum. The ongoing income stagnation of working class families and the growing distance between job opportunities and affordable housing makes the need for subsidized housing more pronounced. Government officials can satisfy more of that need by using scarce Section 8 funds and supporting tax credit developments in segregated neighborhoods where rents and land are cheaper and where white middle-class voters place fewer hurdles in the way. In the long run, however, African Americans will be harmed more by the perpetuation of segregation than by continued overcrowding and inadequate living space. Neither is a good alternative, but short-term gains may not be worth the long-term cost. Okay, and then that is us coming to the end of, I'm not sure what number chapter that is. Let's see. That was the end of chapter 11. And now we're coming to chapter 12, Considering Fixes, which is the last chapter in this book. I read that whole entire chapter myself. My fault. One of the things that I think I pulled away a lot from that chapter was, and they say that looking back, looking forward, is how relevant these issues are, and how these issues are still plaguing our society, and how there were no genuine. Sorry, man, I hate. Lift this up. I don't like when the cord you can hear the cord in the mic throw me off. My fault. This long cord. Dang, this long cord. Okay. The main thing I got from that chapter is, how relevant all of these things still are. How much, as the saying goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And that's sort of what I got out of that, is that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And that it just did a good job of pulling everything together from previous chapters. I have read this book before, and I've also listened to some of the things other people were saying, some of the things other people were reading. And the group conversation also helped with refreshing my memory on some of the things that were taking place in this book. I also think that it was important in that chapter that they pointed out the difficulty in rising out of your living circumstances, or changing your living circumstances, whether it be for the better or for the worse. It did a good job in this chapter of illustrating how a lot of people are born in certain situations and born in certain circumstances, and the society is set up in a certain way, the economy is set up in a certain way for you to continue to live your entire life in those circumstances and to die in those circumstances, and for your children and your children's children to also live and deal with those circumstances. And so that just cuts right at the concept of American exceptionalism, or the concept that everybody can make, Anyways, again, we are doing the ongoing teaching at Say Their Name Square. We are on day 8, book 8. We are reading The Color of Law. This is week 2. Week 2 is the racial injustice week. Please share this video. Please share this video. Please share this video. We want people to come out and participate. I know the weather is a little rough right now, so we're not. So we're going to hold it down. The May 30th Alliance will hold it down through this weather. But we want people to come out and participate. We have literature here. We are reading a different book every day. Again, this week is racial. The week of these next 7 days are about racial injustice, and today is The Color of Law. We are coming up on the final chapter. I'm just gonna get on social media and share this post. It should be pinned to the May 30th Alliance Facebook page right now. If you are watching this, please also share this post. Here, hold on, let me see. Alright, let's see, going to share the post. Let's see. Okay, 1 second. Alright, you guys gotta share this post. Again, if you're watching this, please share this post. I'm going on Facebook right now. Sharing the post. Saturday, Sunday donuts. Donuts out here, come out. Yeah, see, this is an old post. Okay. Pin to top. All right, I got the post pinned. Again, if you're watching this, share this post, share this post, share this post. Ongoing teaching and Say Their Name Square. This is day 8, book 8. We got about 52 minutes left in this day. We are going to try to get this. We are going to get the book finished, but we are going to try to get it finished by midnight. If we do not get it finished by midnight, that's okay. We will wrap it up very close to midnight, and then get on to the next thing, the next book. And the next book is Cast, The Origins of Our Discontent. So I'm very much looking forward to reading. Okay, watch and share. There we go. Okay. There we go. All right. Got that done. Let's pick back up where we left off at. We are on chapter 12, page 195. Again, we are reading The Color of Law. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to do one more thing to check this weather here. Make sure we ain't finna have to deal with nothing. No crazy rain coming no time soon. Let's make sure. Okay. Okay, chapter 12. Considering fixes. As a nation, we have paid an enormous price for avoiding an obligation to remedy the unconstitutional segregation we have allowed to fester. African Americans, of course, suffer from our evasion, but so too does the nation as a whole, as do whites in particular. Many of our serious national problems either originate with residential segregation or have become intractable because of it. We have greater political and social conflict because we must add unfamiliarity with fellow citizens of different racial backgrounds to the challenges we confront in resolving legitimate disagreements about political issues. Racial polarization stemming from our separateness has corrupted our politics, permitting leaders who ignore the interests of white working class voters to mobilize them with racial appeals. Whites may support political candidates who pander to their sense of racial entitlement while advocating policies that perpetuate the inferior economic opportunities that some whites may face. Interracial political alliances become more difficult to organize when whites develop overtly intolerant judgments of the unfortunate from a... Damn, my fault. Damn, this is ready. Interracial political alliances become more difficult to organize when whites develop overtly intolerant judgments of the unfortunate from a need to justify their own acceptance of segregation that so obviously conflicts with both their civic ideals and their religious ones. The existence of black ghettos is a visible reminder of our inequalities in history, a reminder whose implications are so uncomfortable that we find ways to avoid them. Whites can develop a dysfunctional cynicism from living in a society that proclaims values of justice while maintaining racial inequalities that belie those values. It is not only the distribution of our national wealth that suffers from racial isolation, but also our productivity in generating that wealth. Organizations work better if members are comfortable with colleagues' cultural assumptions that may give rise to different perspectives. Social psychologists have found that segregation can give whites an unrealistic belief in their own superiority, leading to poorer performance if they feel less need to challenge themselves. Experiments show that when we are in the teams with others from similar backgrounds, we tend to go along with the popular view rather than think for ourselves, resulting in less creative groups more prone to make errors. That is... that's like a mob mentality thing, which is very relevant because there was a lot of mob mentality and a lot of groupthink going on throughout this book when people were basically, because of the color of someone's skin, trying to prohibit them from being living in certain neighborhoods which, again, we have to remember that it was not just simply prohibiting them from living in certain neighborhoods. Living in those certain neighborhoods has something to do directly with their physical health. They were putting waste and hazardous, hazardous buildings in these black neighborhoods that that white people were not allowing to be put into their neighborhoods. That the white people would block something from being put into their neighborhood because they felt that it was dangerous and hazardous, and then it would get put into the black neighborhood. So physical health was also being deteriorated from this segregation. And then also education. We can never forget that. We can never forget how many opportunities people have lost because of lack of equitable and also equal education. And so as we read about these different things, that's something that stands out to me, is how many things are affected by by the segregation of housing. Part 1. As for children, segregation is not healthy for either whites or African Americans. In segregated schools, neither can gain experience navigating the diverse environments in which, as adults, they will have to make their way. For low-income African American children, the social and economic disadvantages with which they frequently come to school make higher achievement more difficult. Considering just one example, asthma, an affliction from which African American children suffer at nearly twice the rate of white children, probably because African Americans live in or near residential industrial neighborhoods with more dust, pollutants, and vermin. Asthmatic children are more likely to awaken at night wheezing and, if they come to school after an episode, can be drowsy and less able to pay attention. A child who has more frequent absences from poor health, unreliable transportation, having to stay home to care for younger siblings, or family instability will have less opportunity to benefit from instruction. Not all students with these disadvantages perform poorly. A few with asthma achieve at higher levels than typical children without this and similar disadvantages. But on average, a student with problems like these, stemming from life in segregated neighborhoods, performs more poorly. And so, again, we like to reference these things back. That's a real thing here. In our schooling system here. What is it's people who who don't have equal opportunities to this education, who, like they said, lay out all of these things that can inhibit them from being able to receive the lesson properly when they get to school. And then what about the teacher who has grown up in segregation, who black students are foreign to them, and so issues that black people may face are foreign to them, and so they don't feel the need to go the extra mile to be empathetic towards this child who may be missing school for all of those reasons that they just named. And instead of trying to find a way to help that child, they just continue to perpetuate the problem and the cycle with that child. And so, and too, just the manner in which he's pointing out the physical health portion of this is very important. We're going to read a medical apartheid book later on, and so it's good that these different books reference different concepts that will be touched on more deeply in separate books, or have been touched on more deeply in previous books. Man, my right hand is cold. I need to plug something up in the back too, so I'm gonna let this keep running, and then I'm gonna hop up, plug some stuff up, be right back, and we gonna knock out this chapter. Share this video. Yeah, so cold. This cold stuff is crazy. It's rain. Again, share this video. All right, I gotta go plug some stuff in. I'm gonna be right back. We gonna finish this book. I'm gonna keep the live running. shit. Okay. Damn, it's so cold. Shit. Fuck. Goodness. This rain is crazy. Just trying to get situated. Damn. Blanket got wet. This is crazy. This is crazy. It's fucking rain. Okay. Yeah. Loud as hell. Okay. Let's try to get back into it. Got all the batteries charging up. Alright, just gonna pull this hand. Yeah, this shit crazy. Gotta find out where to put my hand at. Warm my damn hand up. Damn, this loud ass fucking car. Excuse my language, I'm sorry. Damn, it's the rain. Rain almost worse than the snow. Okay. Alright. Where we at? Okay. Part 1. Oh no. Oh no, I already did. Okay. Part 2. Remedies that can undo nearly a century of de jure residential segregation will have to be both complex and imprecise. After so much time, we can no longer provide adequate justice to the descendants of those whose constitutional rights were violated. Our focus can be only to develop policies that promote an integrated society, understanding that it will be impossible to fully untangle the web of inequality that we've woven. The challenge is more difficult because low-income African Americans today confront not only segregation, but also the income stagnation and black mobility faced by all Americans and families with lower moderate incomes. Historically, African Americans have made progress mostly when opportunity is expanding for all and whites are less fearful of competition from others. Thus, to provide an adequate environment for integration efforts, the United States also needs a full employment policy, minimum wages that return to their historic level and keep up with inflation, and a transportation infrastructure that makes it possible for low-income workers to get to jobs that are available. This book is not the place to argue for these and similar policies, but I would be remiss if I pretended that desegregation was compatible with economic stress and insecurity. I hesitate to offer suggestions about desegregation policies and remedies because, imprecise and incomplete though they may be, remedies are inconceivable as long as citizens, whatever their political views, continue to accept the myth of de facto segregation. If segregation was created by accident or by undefined private prejudices, it is too easy to believe that it can only be reversed by accident or, in some mysterious way, by changes in people's hearts. But if we, the public and policymakers, acknowledge that the federal, state, and local governments segregated our metropolitan areas, we may open our minds to considering how these same federal, state, and local governments might adopt equally aggressive policies to desegregate. And then that just gets us back into the... Sorry, I got some candy here. I'm going to have to eat this on y'all. We got some... this brings us back to the idea that... But yeah, this just brings us back to the fact that one of the things that Ari has mentioned is that none of these things were done by accident, that these things were not mistakes, these things were not coincidences. And so it's going to, since it was a concerted effort and a conscious effort that it took to get us into this position, it's going to take a concerted effort and a conscious effort to get us out of this position. It took multiple different people's belief patterns and ideological patterns and multiple different people's tactics. All through this book, you hear different tactics that people are using to enact this de facto and de jure segregation. And so I think it's important that we realize that it's going to take multiple avenues for us to fix these things because it took multiple avenues for us to get here. I'm going to... Page 198. 1 second. My fault. Okay. Part 3. Only if we can develop a broadly shared understanding of our common history will it be practical to consider steps we could take to fulfill our obligations. Short of that, we can make a start. Several promising programs are being pursued in some jurisdictions. Civil rights and fair housing organizations in most cities advocate and, in many cases, help to implement reforms that begin to ameliorate the worst effects of de jure segregation. While we attempt to build public and political support for the more far-reaching remedies, we should advance the presently possible reforms as well. We might begin with high school and middle school curricula. If young people are not taught an accurate account of how we came to be segregated, their generation will have little chance of doing a better job of desegregating than the previous ones. One of the most commonly used American history textbooks is The Americans, Reconstruction to the 21st Century, a 1,000-page volume published by Holt McDougall, a division of the publishing giant Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. It lists several well-respected professors as authors and editors. The 2012 edition has this to say about residential segregation in the North. African Americans found themselves forced into segregated neighborhoods. That's it. One passive voice sentence. No suggestion of who might have done the forcing or how it was implemented. The Americans also contains this paragraph. Quote, a number of New Deal programs concern housing and home mortgage problems. The Homeowners Loan Corporation, HOLC, provided government loans to homeowners who faced foreclosure because they couldn't meet their loan payments. In addition, the 1934 National Housing Act created the Federal Housing Administration. This agency continues to furnish loans for home mortgage and repairs today. The authors do not mention that an enduring legacy of the HOLC was to color code every urban neighborhood by race so that African Americans would have great difficulty getting mortgages. That the FHA suburbanized the entire nation on a whites-only basis is overlooked. The textbook does not acknowledge that a, quote, number of, quote, New Deal agencies. The truth is that it was virtually all pay lower wages to African Americans than to whites, but fails to refer to the residential segregation imposed by the government's public housing projects. United States History, Reconstruction to the Present, a 2016 textbook issued by the educational publishing giant Pearson, offers a similar account. It celebrates the FHA's and VA's support of single-family developments and gives Leventon as an example of a suburbanization without disclosing that African Americans were excluded. It boasts of the PWA's bridge, dam, power plant, and government building projects, but omits describing its insistence on segregated housing. Like the Americans, it employs the passive voice to avoid explaining segregation. In the North, quote, in the North, too, African Americans face segregation and discrimination, even where there were no explicit laws. De facto segregation, or segregation by unwritten custom or tradition, was a fact of life. African Americans in the North were denied housing in many neighborhoods. End quote. This is mendacious. There was nothing unwritten about government policy to promote segregation in the North. It was spelled out in the FHA's underwriting manual, in the PWA's and subsequent agencies' racial designation of housing projects, in congressional votes on the 1949 Public Housing Integration Amendment, and in written directives of federal and state officials. With very rare exceptions, textbook after textbook adopts the same methodology. If middle and high school students are being taught a false history, is it any wonder that they come to believe that African Americans are segregated only because they don't want to marry or because they prefer to live only among themselves? Is it any wonder that they grow up inclined to think that programs to ameliorate ghetto conditions are simply undeserved handouts? Oh, shit. I didn't realize there was a car right there. Man, this crooked. The camera crooked. Man. Hold on. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Oh, damn. Yeah, it's kind of crooked. 1 second. I gotta get a drink. My legs is cold, man. Boom. Mm-hmm. Ooh, my fault. I'm sorry. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, 1 second. Mm-hmm. Okay, part 4. In 2015, the Obama administration unveiled a rule to implement an underappreciated provision of the 1968 Fair Housing Act that requires jurisdictions that receive federal funds to affirmatively further the purposes of the law. The rule instructed cities, towns, and suburbs to assess their concentrations or absence of disadvantaged populations and identify goals to remedy segregated conditions. The rules seem to assume that segregated white communities want to do the right thing but don't have the adequate information to do so. Giving suburbs around the country the benefit of the doubt may have been a smart way to encourage them to fulfill their affirmatively furthering obligations. Left unsaid was what HUD might do if suburbs don't take steps necessary to advance integration. Did the Obama administration plan to deny federal funds to suburbs that remain segregated? Police killings of young black men in 2014 and 2015 called renewed attention to our racial divide. The presidential election of 2016 revealed that the nation was almost evenly split between those who believe that we've done too much to remedy racial inequality and those who believe we've done not nearly enough. In early 2017, congressional Republicans proposed legislation to prohibit enforcement of the affirmatively furthering rule. But even if the rule were to survive, or if a future administration reintroduces it, effective remedies for racial inequality will be unlikely unless the public is disabused of the de facto myth and comes to understand how government at all levels insulted our constitutional principles regarding race. Part 5. In 1970, stung by riots in more than 100 cities by angry and embittered African Americans, HUD Secretary George Romney tried to pursue integration more vigorously than any other administration, either before or since. In 1970, stung by riots in more than 100 cities by angry and embittered African Americans, HUD Secretary George Romney tried to pursue integration more vigorously than any other administration, either before or since. Observing that the federal government had imposed a suburban white noose around urban African American neighborhoods, Romney devised a program he called Open Communities that would deny federal funds for water and sewer upgrades, green space, sidewalk improvements, and other projects for which HUD financial support is needed, to suburbs that hadn't revised their exclusionary zoning laws to permit construction of subsidized apartments for lower African American families. The anger about open communities among voters in the Republican Party suburban base was so fierce that President Nixon reined in Romney, required him to repudiate his plan, and eventually forced him from office. George Romney undertook his desegregation initiative only a few years after a series of civil rights measures had been enacted into law and after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights leaders and activists. It followed upon the release of a widely discussed report on the causes of African American rioting, published by an investigatory commission appointed by President Johnson and chaired by Illinois Governor Otto Kerner. Because of all this attention to the suppression of African Americans and to the federal government's partial responsibility for it, many Americans were receptive to Romney's argument, although they were not sufficiently numerous or influential for him to prevail. Today, many fewer Americans are familiar with the extent of de jure segregation. The intellectual and political groundwork has not been laid for a revival of the George Romney program or for the Obama administration's more modest 2015 rule. Americans are unaware of the de jure segregation history that makes the rule necessary. Part 6. It is not difficult to conceive of ways to rectify the legacy of de jure segregation. In what follows, I'll suggest a few. First, some that cannot be enacted in today's political environment, and then some modest reforms that are still not politically possible, but are within closer reach. We might contemplate a remedy like this. Considering that African Americans comprise about 15% of the population of the New York metropolitan area, the federal government should purchase the next 15% of houses that come up for sale in Leventon at today's market rates, approximately $350,000. It should then resell the properties to qualified African Americans for $75,000, the price, in today's dollars, that their grandparents would have paid if permitted to do so. The government should enact this program in every suburban development whose construction complied with the FHA's discriminatory requirements. If Congress established such a program and justified it based on the history of de jure segregation, courts should uphold it as appropriate. Of course, no presently constituted Congress would adopt such a policy, and no presently constituted court would uphold it. Taxpayers will rebel at the cost as well as at the perceived underdeserved gift to African Americans. I present this not as a practical proposal, but only to illustrate the kind of remedy that we would consider and debate if we disabused ourselves of the de facto segregation myth. Part 7. Okay, let me speak on that too. I'm trying to get through the book, so I'm not trying to do too much. But for a sidebar, uh, this is again with some of the things. Part five, and part six. Part five, he spoke about protests and uprisings and the police killings of black people and how those things relate to neighborhoods and to communities and to de facto segregation. So I thought that was important. And then as we get to part six, this he's proposing solutions, and I think that that is a very reasonable solution. But I think that he's right when he points out the fact that the society is not at a place politically, a political conscious enough place to understand something like that. Part seven. The segregation we should remedy is not only that of low-income families, but that of middle-class African Americans who currently reside in towns like Lakeview, where Vince Meriday settled and which is still today 85% African American, or Roosevelt, Long Island, currently 79% African American, another predominantly black middle-class town near where other Meriday relatives found homes, or Prince George's County, 65% African American, outside Washington, D.C., or Calumet Heights, 93% African American, outside Chicago. Middle-class suburbs like these are attractive to many African Americans, and no policy should force them to integrate against their will. But we should provide incentives for integration because these suburbs have disadvantages for their residents and for the rest of us. The most important disadvantage is that they are frequently adjacent to low-income communities. About one-third of middle and upper-class black families now live in neighborhoods bordering severely disadvantaged areas, while only 6% of income similar white families do so. Black middle-class adolescents living in such close proximity to ghettos must resist the lure of gangs and of alienated behavior if they aspire to duplicate their parents' middle-class status. Even if they avoid such a trap, youth growing up in predominantly African American communities, even middle-class ones, will gain no experience mastering a predominantly white professional culture in which they, as adults, will want to succeed. Federal subsidies for middle-class African Americans to purchase homes in suburbs that have been racially exclusive are the most obvious incentive that can spur integration. Again, such assistance is both politically and judicially inconceivable today. Although government financial aid of this kind is still out of reach, advocates of integration can express their support in ways local, in very local and even informal ways. Although government financial aid of this kind is still out of reach, advocates of integration can express their support in very local and even informal ways. If one, not the only one, of the reasons that middle-class African Americans hesitate to integrate their expectation of hostility if one, not the only one, of the reasons that middle-class African Americans hesitate to integrate is their expectation of hostility from subtly hostile neighbors, from police who follow their sons home, then community welcoming committees that, among other actions, insist upon appropriate police training could be useful. Making a point, perhaps even a requirement, of advertising houses for sale in such neighborhoods with real estate agents who do business in segregated African American communities could also help. Part 8. Another remedy would be a ban on zoning ordinances that prohibit multifamily housing or that require all single-family homes in the neighborhood to be built on large lots with high minimum requirements for square footage. These rules prevent both lower income and middle class families from settling in affluent suburbs. Exclusionary zoning ordinances were partly motivated by unconstitutional racial animosity. Banning them is not only good public policy, but constitutionally permissible, if not at the federal level, then by states. Oh, the battery. Okay. Damn it. Phone battery getting low. Gonna have to go grab a battery in a second. Let's try to knock some more of this out. Alternatively, less extreme than an outright ban on exclusionary zoning, Congress could amend the tax code to deny the mortgage interest deduction to property owners in suburbs that do not have or are not taking aggressive steps to attract their fair share of low and moderate income housing, both multi-unit and single-family, whether for rental or sale. A fair share is one that is close to that of low and moderate income families in the suburbs metropolitan area, or as a constitutional remedy, the share of African Americans in the A fair share is one that is close to that of low and moderate income families in the suburbs metropolitan area, or as a constitutional remedy, the share of African Americans. I'm fucking this sentence all the way up. A fair share is one that is close to that of low and moderate income families in the suburbs metropolitan area, or as a constitutional remedy, the share of African Americans in the metropolitan area. How close is close to in a region with a substantial African American population? Perhaps plus or minus 10%. The New York metropolitan area has an African American population of about 15% today. If we use the plus or minus 10% rule, then any suburb whose African American population was less than 5% should be considered segregated and required to take steps to integrate. For any community whose African American population was greater than 25%, special incentives should be offered to help families move to integrated towns or to attract non-black families to live there. Complementing a ban on exclusionary zoning is a requirement for inclusionary zoning, a positive effort to integrate low and moderate income families into middle class and affluent neighborhoods. Two states, New Jersey and Massachusetts, currently have fair share requirements based on income, not on race. They address the isolation of low-income families in urban areas and their absence from middle-class suburbs. They make a contribution to integration but do not take the additional step of helping to integrate middle-income African-American families into white middle-class suburbs. Legislation in New Jersey requires suburbs that do not have a quote-unquote fair share of their metropolitan area's low-income housing to permit developers to build multi-unit projects that are frequently subsidized either with Section 8 or low-income housing tax credit funds. Similar legislation in Massachusetts requires developers in towns without a fair share of subsidized housing to set aside units in middle-income projects for low-income families. Developments that do so are permitted more units per acre than would otherwise be allowed. Douglas Macy and his colleagues in climbing Mount Laurel described one such successful project in the New Jersey suburb of Philadelphia. Disproving fears of the area's middle-class residents, the project did not bring crime into the town of Mount Laurel, diminish the quality of its public school, or otherwise harm the community's character. If other states were to adopt legislation like that in New Jersey and Massachusetts, it would be a significant step toward the integration of all low-income families, not only African Americans. Some municipalities have inclusionary zoning ordinances that accomplish at a local level what the New Jersey and Massachusetts programs do statewide. The regulations usually require developers to set aside a share of units in new projects for low or moderate income families. As in Massachusetts, the developers are offered an incentive, higher density than is normally permitted, for example, to comply. The ordinances are sometimes effective, but unless they are implemented on a metropolitan-wide basis, their value as an integration tool is limited. If an exclusionary zoning ordinance applies only to a single town, developers can avoid its requirements and serve the same housing market by building instead in a neighborhood town without such rules. Montgomery County, Maryland has a strong county-wide inclusionary zoning ordinance. Like most such regulations, it requires developers in even the most affluent communities to set aside a percentage of units, in the case of Montgomery County, 12 to 13%, for moderate income families. It then goes further. The Public Housing Authority purchases a third of these set-aside units for rental to the lowest income families. The program's success is evidenced by the measurably higher achievement of low-income African-American children who live and attend a school in the county's wealthiest suburbs. Montgomery County's program should be widely duplicated. Excuse me. Part 9. In 1993, Part 9. In 1993, a quarter century after the Fair Housing Act was enacted, John Boger, a University of North Carolina law professor, lamented the subsequent lack of progress toward residential integration. I believe it. I fell asleep last time. I was too tired. I seen you last time. I'm up this time. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Look, you all locked and loaded.
Yep.
You gotta
I'm too comfortable. Yep.
You
I'm sorry. Damn, my fault. My fault.
every time.
No, the mic further away. You can't hear. You got to like talk into it. Oh yeah, like 3 days ago they came. Yeah, they came like 3 days ago in the morning while Terry was back there reading. They just came. They just was tripping. They brought like 8 of them out too. What they wanted? They took like some blankets. That's all they did. They took blankets and gave some citations. I ain't gonna lie, a little short. One blanket would help. Like just one. Just one? That's it. I get a couple. I'll give them to y'all tomorrow. That worked. Two big ones that I got. They're like big ass quilts. Thank you. That worked. Yep, I got you. I'll be back. Okay. Have a good night. Yep, I did. Okay. Thank you for the coffee. Okay, I'm gonna be looking out. Okay, y'all. We're on part 9. This is 1993. In 1993, a quarter century after the Fair Housing Act was enacted, John Boger, a University of North Carolina law professor, lamented the subsequent lack of progress toward residential integration. He suggested a national Fair Share Act that would require every state to establish mechanisms to ensure that each of its suburban or municipal jurisdiction houses a representative share of the African American as well as low and moderate income population in its metropolitan region. Professor Boger proposed that homeowners in jurisdictions that did not make progress towards such racial and economic integration would lose 10% of their mortgage, interest, and property tax deductions. The penalty would increase in each year of jurisdictions' noncompliance with that fair share goal until the entire deduction would be lost. If enacted, the plan would give citizens a powerful economic incentive to press their local officials to take reasonable steps toward integration. But the idea was not intended to be punitive. Professor Boger argued that the Internal Revenue Service should keep funds equivalent to the lost deductions in an account at the Treasury, reserving these funds for helping segregated communities whose residents had lost those deductions to develop public housing, or low and moderate income subsidized housing. Because Professor Boger's purpose was not to challenge the de facto segregation myth, he did not add that such reserve funds could also be used to subsidize the middle class or even affluent African Americans to reside in suburbs they could not otherwise easily afford. But in the view of the de jure origins of suburban segregation, this too would be an appropriate use of the withheld taxpayer deductions. Professor Boger's proposal for a Fair Share Act is no less timely today than when he first advanced it. And so right now they're going through and giving Right now, they're going through and they are giving solutions, possible solutions, and naming other people who have came up with possible solutions. I think that it's important that we point out this is in 1993 that this man is proposing these things because the fact that the lack of equitability that has been attained for black people. And this also affects low-income housing. You know, I'm happy that this book, and we have multiple books that does this, but it doesn't just only touch on just black people. It touches on black people, but also working-class people and poor people. And I'm finna go grab a battery to plug this in so we can keep on running, keep on reading. We're on part 10 of reading The Color of Law, ongoing teaching to say their name square. This is day 8, book 8. I will be right back. I knew it. Look, 10%. Fuck. Okay. Got the charger. It's back charging. All right. It's charging. Damn. All right. I'm bike. We bike. We the police. Pump police. All right. Let's knock this out. Keep it pushing. All right, we're on part 10. Part 10. Successful civil Part 10. Successful civil rights lawsuits have led to a few innovative programs that integrate low-income families into middle-class neighborhoods. In 1995, there we go. In 1995, the American Civil Liberties Union of Maryland sued HUD and the Baltimore Housing Authority because as these agencies demolished public housing projects, they resettled tenants, frequently with Section 8 vouchers, almost exclusively in segregated low-income areas. The lawsuit resulted in commitments by the federal and local governments to support the former residents in moving to high-opportunity suburbs. The authority now funds an increased subsidy higher than the regular Section 8 voucher amount to families that rent in non-segregated The authority now funds an increased subsidy higher than the regular Section 8 voucher amount to families that rent in non-segregated communities throughout Baltimore County and other nearby counties. Participants can use their vouchers in neighborhoods where the poverty rate is less than 10%. The population is no more than 30% African American or other minority, and fewer than 5% of households are subsidized. The mobility program not only places voucher holders in apartments, it also purchases houses on the open market and then rents them to program participants. It provides intensive counseling to the former public housing residents to help them adjust to their new, predominantly white and middle-class environs. Counseling covers topics such as household budgeting, cleaning and maintenance of appliances, communicating with landlords, and making friends with neighbors. Those who have participated in this Baltimore program left communities with average poverty rates of 33% and found new dwellings where average rates were 8%. In their former neighborhoods, the African American population was 80%. In their new ones, it is 21%. However, only a small proportion of former public housing tenants can participate in the program. Most use their Section 8 vouchers, as do recipients nationwide, to subsidize living in an already segregated low-income area. A similar program arose from lawsuits filed in 1985 by a civil rights group against the Dallas Housing Authority and HUD over their use of the public housing or Section 8 programs to perpetuate segregation. Here, too, the case settlement provides families with a higher value voucher when they relocate to a non-segregated suburb where the poverty rate is low and where public school students are high performing. A Dallas civil rights group, the Inclusive Communities Project, uses settlement funds for security deposits and counseling services to help families make the adjustment from racially separate public housing and Section 8 neighborhoods to integrated suburban environments. As in Baltimore, the Dallas program desegregates only a small percentage of families who are eligible for housing assistance. A few other cities also now have modest programs, some also resulting from settlements and lawsuits that challenge how the Section 8 program reinforces segregation, that assists voucher holders in moving to lower poverty areas. Several municipalities and states outlaw flat refusals by landlords to lease to Section 8 voucher families, and those jurisdictions seem to be making a bit more progress toward integration. To allow owners to claim they are not discriminating by race when renters are turned away solely because they are subsidized makes a mockery of the Fair Housing Act. Such discrimination should be prohibited everywhere. The Section 8 voucher program is not an entitlement. Many more eligible families don't receive vouchers than do because Section 8 budgetary appropriations are too small. In 2015, approximately 1 million families have vouchers, but another 6 million who qualified went without them. There are long waiting lists for vouchers in every city that has a large African American low-income population. Indeed, in many cities, the waiting lists have been closed. So, in addition to prohibiting discrimination against voucher holders, Congress should appropriate funds to provide vouchers for all whose low-income status qualifies. The housing subsidy that the federal government gives to middle-class, mostly white, homeowners is an entitlement. Any homeowner with enough income to file a detailed tax return can claim a deduction both for property taxes and mortgage interest. The government does not tell homeowners that only the first few who file can claim the deductions and the rest are out of luck because the money has been used up. But that is how we handle the Section 8 subsidy for lower income, mostly African American renters. So long as a shortage of vouchers persists, Congress should require that local housing authorities establish a preference for tenants who volunteer to use their Section 8 benefits to find apartments in integrated, low-poverty neighborhoods. To make this possible, other reforms are necessary. Voucher amounts are normally set to permit leasing of apartments whose rents are close to the median for a metropolitan area. But rental amounts that are typical for a metropolitan area overall are too low for leasing in most low-poverty neighborhoods. So voucher amounts will have to be increased if programs like Baltimore's are to expand nationwide, and more dollars for security deposits, for example, made available as well. Large numbers of counselors and social workers will have to be hired and trained. Funds will also have to be authorized to enable authorities to purchase single-family homes for some former public housing residents. In Baltimore, the court compelled HUD to come up with such funds. Expanding this program will require congressional action. In its waning days, the Obama administration announced that HUD would begin calculating Section 8 voucher amounts for smaller areas than a full metropolis. Section 8 recipients will receive larger subsidies to rent apartments in higher cost, middle-class neighborhoods, and smaller subsidies to use in lower-income neighborhoods where rents are lower. As this is written, it is too soon to know whether the new administration will maintain or reverse this new policy. Other more technical reforms of the Section 8 program could also help. For example, the vouchers are usually administered by a city housing authority that has no right to permit the vouchers to be used outside city limits. Vouchers can't contribute much to integration unless jurisdictional rules are vouchers can't contribute much to integration unless such jurisdictional rules are eliminated and the program is organized on a metropolitan basis. State policy could also improve the potential of Section 8 to promote integration. Illinois presently extends a property tax reduction to landlords in low-poverty neighborhoods who rent to voucher holders. Other states should do likewise. The Federal Department of the Treasury should require states to distribute the low-income housing tax credits to developers building in integrated high-opportunity neighborhoods. In segregated areas, a project that purports to help revitalize the community should be approved only as part of a coordinated urban development program that includes transportation infrastructure, job creation, inclusionary zoning, supermarkets, community policing, and other characteristics of healthy neighborhoods. But when developers have claimed to use tax credits to upgrade urban neighborhoods, what they have most frequently meant is bringing modern housing to an impoverished community. New construction is fine, but it can also reinforce segregation. 50 years of experience has shown that mobilizing the funds and support for revitalizing low-income communities is as politically difficult as integrating suburbs, so we continue to have more tax credit projects and more Section 8 housing in segregated neighborhoods without the surrounding community improvements that were promised. Revitalization does generally occur when a neighborhood becomes attractive to the middle class, but all too often the gentrification that follows does not include strict enforcement of inclusionary zoning principles, and it gradually drives the African American poor out of their now upgraded neighborhoods and into newly segregated inner ring suburbs. And then coming up here on part 11. But before we get to part 11, I want to expound a little bit further on what they touched on. And again, let's just to clarify, we on 1209. We are officially on day 9 of the ongoing teaching at Say the Name Square, but we are on book 8. We bleeding in to the next day a little bit, but we are coming to the end of this, so we will begin reading Cast very soon here. And so I just like how this lays out some more of the specifics. He's laying out some more possibilities to alleviating these things. Again, a lot of this information, one of the things that probably that happened when we were reading the books about police terrorism and mass incarceration is around, once we got to about day 4 or 5, we were seeing some of the same terminology used a little bit more, some of the same government verbiage used a little bit more. So I think one of the things that has happened here is that some of the language is starting to take some time to get used to, and some of the departments is taking some time to get used to. But I think that it is plenty more books on this specific type of issue and incident. And so I think that that's an important thing to look more into. Okay, part 11. Frank and Rosalie Stevenson raised 3 daughters in their segregated Richmond neighborhood, where average student performance was among the lowest in the state of California. When the girls were in the primary grades in the late 1950s and early 1960s, African American children composed only 22% of Richmond's elementary school population, but 6 of the district's elementary schools were over 95% African American. Schools in Richmond were segregated primarily because federal and local housing policies had segregated the city itself. But Richmond school officials took additional measures to ensure that African American children did not attend the same school as white children. For example, the Perez School, with the 93% black enrollment in 1967, was situated west of the railroad tracks in a neighborhood that included 3 blocks that had remained white. The school board carved the 3-block strip out of the Perez attendance zone and assigned students who lived there to attend the all-white Belding School across the railroad tracks. The school that the Stevenson daughters attended, Verde Elementary in unincorporated North Richmond, was west of the railroad tracks and not far from the oil refinery. The school had originally been constructed in 1951 to prevent black students from attending nearby schools in white neighborhoods. Verde was still 99% African American in 1968 when it became so overcrowded that the school district had to respond. Meanwhile, nearby schools in white neighborhoods had many empty seats as a growing number of white families left Richmond for the suburbs. But instead of allowing African American children to occupy those seats, the district decided to build an addition to Verde. This was such an obvious attempt to perpetuate segregation that civil rights groups sued. The trial judge ordered integration and later told an interviewer that he had been offended by the racially biased testimony of a school board member who defended the district's policy. Instead of appealing the judge's decision, the district agreed to a desegregation plan that modified attendance zones. But before the policy could be implemented, voters elected an anti-integration majority to the school board, which then reneged on its commitment. Instead, it adopted a voluntary program in which African American children could choose to attend a predominantly white school. By 1980, only 1 in 6 black children had done so. These were generally children with the most educationally sophisticated and motivated parents. Their transfers left school in Richmond's black neighborhoods with the most disadvantaged students, those with the lowest academic performance and greatest behavioral challenge. Even today, as low-income Hispanic families replace African Americans in North Richmond, all students at the Verde School receive subsidized lunches, and 58% of its parents have not completed high school. Richmond School Board could easily segregate its elementary schools because Richmond's neighborhoods were segregated. But for junior and senior high schools, the district created artificial boundaries that prevented many African American students from enrolling in their local schools. Instead, the district transported them to predominantly African American schools that were already more congested than the white ones. Whites also had to travel longer distances to avoid attending heavily African American schools near their homes. The assistant superintendent explained at a 1958 public meeting called to protest the segregation at the boundaries assigned to, The assistant superintendent explained at a 1958 public meeting called to protest the segregation that the boundaries, quote, assigned to mostly black Richmond Union High School, the bulk of students who can benefit from the SHOP program there, and the existing boundaries of mostly white Harry Ellis High School are valid because the students who are grouped there are those who can profit from the academic program. Civil rights protests forced the school district to redraw the high school attendance boundaries in 1959, but because of neighborhood segregation, African Americans remained concentrated in 2 of the 11 junior high schools and in Richmond High School. That's where Terry, the youngest of the Stevenson girls, graduated in 1970. Off and on, she took community college courses but never completed a college degree. She worked all her life in daycare centers and as a nursing assistant, and had 6 children of her own. Terry Stevenson's 2 sons are warehouse workers. Of her 4 daughters, 2 are certified nurse assistants, 1 answers phones inquiries at a bank, and 1 is a security guard. Terry Stevenson's sisters also have children. They include a paralegal working at a law firm, a pharmacist assistant, a clerical worker at a government social service agency, and a department store sales clerk. What might have become of these Stevenson grandchildren if their parents had grown up and attended school in an integrated Millipitis? I ain't seen that one before. No, it's the name of like a school. It's like Millipitis or something like that. What might have become of these Stevenson grandchildren if their parents had grown up and attended school in an integrated school, not in a de jure segregated Richmond? Should they now have partners with similar occupations? Their household incomes are unlikely to rise above the 4th income quintile of Americans. How much farther on the socioeconomic ladder would they have been able to climb if they had grown up in a well-educated household as a result of Terry and her sisters being permitted to attend a high school that was designed for students who can profit from the academic program rather than one that instead offered manual training? How different might the lives of the Stevenson grandchildren have been were it not for the federal government's unconstitutional determination to segregate their grandparents and their parents as well? What do we, the American community, owe this family, and this and future generations, for their loss of opportunity? How might we fulfill this obligation? Okay, that is the last chapter of The Color of Law. We have, it's a epilogue in here. Let's see how long this epilogue is. We have an epilogue in here that is only 3 pages. So we will knock out the epilogue, and then I will pass this off, and we will start reading Cast. Oh, yeah. Let's see, 215. It's a picture. Says a New Deal housing agency drew maps of metropolitan areas nationwide. Neighborhoods where African Americans resided were colored red to caution appraisers not to approve loans. This map is Detroit. This is For anybody who knows what that means, you can't really see it here. This is black and white some, but this is a redlining map. That's what when it says neighborhoods where African Americans resided were colored red to caution appraisers not to approve loans. It's redlining. All right, let's see. Epilogue. When Chief Justice John Roberts wrote that if residential segregation, quote, is a product not of state action but of private choices, it does not have constitutional implications, end quote, he set forth a principle. Excuse me. But the principle supported his conclusion that government remedies for segregation were impermissible only because he assumed an inaccurate factual background, that residential segregation was mostly created by private choices. We need not argue with the Chief Justice's principle. His jurisprudence is flawed mainly because he and his colleagues got their facts wrong. Residential segregation was created by state action, making it necessary to invoke the inseparable complements of the Roberts principle. Where segregation is the product of state action, it has constitutional implication and requires a remedy. Just like Supreme Court justices, we as a nation have avoided contemplating remedies because we've indulged in the comfortable delusion that our segregation has not resulted primarily from state action, and so we conclude there is not much we are required to do about it. Because once entrenched, segregation is difficult to reverse. The easiest course is to ignore it. It's not that private choices haven't also been involved. Many Americans had discriminatory beliefs and engaged in activities that contributed to separating the races. Without the support of these private beliefs and actions, our democratically elected governments might not have discriminated either. But under our constitutional system, government has not merely the option, but the responsibility to resist racially discriminatory views, especially when a majority holds them. In the 20th century, federal, state, and local officials did not resist majority opinion with regard to race. Instead, they endorsed and reinforced it, actively and aggressively. If government had declined to build racially separate public housing in cities where segregation had previously taken root, and instead had scattered integrated developments throughout the community, those cities might have developed in a less racially toxic fashion with fewer desperate ghettos and more diverse suburbs. If the federal government had not urged suburbs to adopt exclusionary zoning laws, white flight would have been minimized because there would have been fewer racially exclusive suburbs to which frightened homeowners could flee. If the government had told developers that they could have FHA guarantees only if the homes they built were open to all, integrated working-class suburbs would likely have matured with both African Americans and whites sharing the benefits. If state courts had not blessed private discrimination by ordering the eviction of African American homeowners in neighborhoods where association rules and restrictive covenants barred their residents, middle-class African Americans would have been able gradually to integrate previously white communities as they developed the financial means to do so. If churches, universities, and hospitals have faced loss of tax-exempt status for their promotion of restrictive covenants, they most likely would have refrained from such activity. If police had arrested rather than encouraged leaders of mob violence when African Americans moved into previously white neighborhoods, racial transitions would have been smoother. If state real estate commissions had denied licenses to brokers who claimed an ethical obligation to impose segregation, those brokers might have guided the evolution of interracial neighborhoods. If school boards had not placed schools and drawn attendance boundaries to ensure the separation of black and white pupils, families might not have had to relocate to have access to education for their children. If federal and state highway planners had not used urban interstates to demolish African American neighborhoods and force their residents deeper into urban ghettos, black impoverishment would have lessened, and some displaced families might have accumulated the resources to improve their housing and its location. If government had given African Americans the same labor market rights that other citizens enjoyed, African American working class families would not have been trapped in lower income minority communities from lack of funds to live elsewhere. If the federal government had not exploited the racial boundaries it had created in metropolitan areas by spending billions on tax breaks for single-family suburban homeowners while failing to spend adequate funds on transportation networks that could bring African Americans to job opportunities, the inequality on which segregation feeds would have diminished. If federal programs were not, even to this day, reinforcing racial isolation by disproportionately directing low-income African Americans who receive housing assistance into the segregated neighborhoods that government had previously established, we might see many more inclusive communities. Undoing the effects of de jure segregation will be incomparably difficult. To make a start, we will first have to contemplate what we have collectively done and, on behalf of our government, accept responsibility. Okay, that is the epilogue of The Color of Law. There is an appendix in here with frequently asked questions. I read some of that the first time I read through it. We're definitely not going to read through it today. But I encourage people to go out, purchase this book, and to read through the frequently asked questions. It's also an author's note and acknowledgement section in here that I would encourage people to go to read through. And then at the end, they just sort of have all the bibliography for the places that were used as references for some of the statistics, the stats and news stories and things of that nature. Okay, so we have just wrapped up Book 8. We are coming to the beginning of Day 9. Today we are reading Cast. Let's see. Okay. Oh, dang. All right, today we are reading Cast. I believe this is going to be the biggest book we have read to date. I think this has the most pages in it. Yeah, this is going to be the book that we've read with the most pages so far. Looks like this one has about 380, 382, 388. Okay, this one got 388 pages. This is Cast, The Origins of Our Discontentment by Isabel Wilkerson. She also wrote The Warmth of Other Suns, which I highly recommend. I have not read the entirety of it, but it is a book that I own, and I've heard only amazing and great things about it. That is a book that's sort of similar to The Color of Law, or it touches on some of the same concepts of The Color of Law, The Warmth of Other Suns, so I encourage people to go and read that. The Color of Law is the first book in our second week of racial injustice, so that's in the books. We'll put that there. We're going to end this live here, get ready and start a new live for the reading of Cast. And I want, again, anybody who is out there that's watching this, whether you're watching it live or you're watching it at a later date, we are continuing the ongoing teaching and Say Their Name Square through the entirety of April. We are having breakfast Saturday and Sundays, 9 a.m. to noon. Fridays from 6 to 8, we're having pizza. And every day at 5 o'clock p.m., we participate in a group discussion. You do not have to have read the book or listened to come out and participate in a group discussion. We would love for you to read the book or listen in at home and then come out and participate in a group discussion, but it is not a prerequisite for the group discussion. We're on the second week. This week will all be about racial injustice. We want to encourage people to share all of these posts, go back and watch the old videos that we have so that way you can be caught up. And again, we are on day 188, I think, day 188, 187, something like that of Occupy City Hall. And all right, I'm going to end this one, and then we are going to get ready to start reading Cast. If anybody is at home or reading along or however you're doing it, I know some people have been purchasing some of these books, or some people have some of these books and have been reading along with us. We're switching. We're going to start reading Cast. So we'll be back up in about 10 minutes. We'll be back online. 10 minutes. All right, I'm going to end this.